Can you imagine that? You escape Vietnam, and you die from an airline fatality, said Erickson. Clark replied, "Never happened, Cherry. You survived Nam. You get to live forever, man." Recognize this quote's movie? Stay tuned to find out, or check out the title of this episode of Talking Pictures Trivia.
Welcome to Talking Pictures Trivia, the podcast in which a group of geographically challenged friends explore movies through trivia as an excuse to keep their friendships alive. I'm one of these friends and today's host, Tom, and with me is...
Ragnar.
Margaret.
Thanks for joining us. Ragnar has joined us for over a dozen movies, not including Mighty Ducks 2. Margaret is joining us for the first time and joins us from the University of Connecticut, where Tom also works. Margaret is currently working on her PhD in English and focused on popular poetry and national identity. Ragnar and Margaret conveniently like movies. For those joining us for the first time, we start off each episode with a movie quiz, as these pivotal questions will determine who earns today's trivia crown. In round 1, each question is worth 1 point, and in round 2, each question is worth 2 points. Then, once the fierce competition is over, we follow it up with our famous movie rant, where anything goes. Walking up to the theaters in 1989, we would have had to choose between Lethal Weapon 2, When Harry Met Sally, Weird Al's UHF, Eddie and the Cruisers 2, Black Rain, and today's movie, Casualties of War. Okay, so Casualties of Wars, it's a true story, or based upon a true story, and it is about Michael J. Fox's character, Max Erickson, who is in Vietnam under Sergeant Tony Meserve, who is played by Sean Penn. While on a patrol, Meserve and the other people he's on patrol with, including Clark, John C. Reilly's character Hatcher, John Leguizamo's character Antonio Diaz, they kidnap a young Vietnamese woman who they take on the patrol. They eventually, with the exception of Michael J. Fox's character Erickson, rape and murder her. Erickson tries to save her life. He tries to stop them from aggressing on her. However, they do rape her and they do kill her. And then in the second half of the movie, we see Erickson trying to seek justice for her in this impossible situation. Ragnar, if you had one word to describe Casualties of War, what would it be?
Tragic. What about you, Margaret?
Upsetting.
And my word would be compassion.
It's time for Question 1.
Just before saving Erickson from falling into the Viet Cong tunnel, Meserve aids another soldier by doing what?
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right, Margaret, since you locked in second, you go first. What do you have?
Put attending to a wound, treating a wound.
Okay. And Ragnar, what do you have?
Yeah, she's probably right now that I think about it. I would say that he lifts a person to get them out of the way of the incoming shelling.
Okay. So we'll go with 0 points for this first question. It was a man is saying, "I've lost my arm," and he gives him a stick and tells him, "This is your arm."
Ah,
Yes, I remember that now.
yeah.
Yes. Because he was refusing to be moved.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was like, "Where's my arm?" And he was just going crazy. Yes, I remember now.
Mm-hmm.
That really started off, set the tone of the film, for sure.
Yeah. So I brought this question forward because I did want to, before getting into some of the more serious topics, how the movie sets up these characters, especially Meserve, excuse me, the villain of the piece, because he's set up in a very interesting and I think particular way that I think a lesser movie wouldn't do. And I was wondering what you guys thought of how these characters are presented to us.
I felt that this was the strength of the movie that it didn't really hit me while I was watching the film. It hit me hours later. Jumping a little bit ahead, when Michael J. Fox character Erickson tries to tell everybody what happened, he was obviously pushed back upon, and somebody told him, "Wasn't this the guy that saved your life? You're alive now because of him, and now you're trying to ruin his life." And at first, I took that as a man look, they're trying to keep him quiet and avoid an incident, and that's exactly what they were doing. But I think that Palma is also trying to paint a very deep picture of a kid. I mean, this guy was in his early 20s, and he's put into a hell zone. And we've known throughout all the different wars how young people lose their minds essentially in these kind of environments. And one minute he's saving 2 people in the beginning, and then eventually he cracks and does the complete opposite and goes the wrong way. So it's just that kind of picture. I wouldn't see that deep of a character portrayal in this kind of movie from a lesser director. I would expect more just like an evil person outright.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I found it helpful that they showed him as like a very heroic kid. I think it's also worth noting, like, you can be more than one thing at once. That and sometimes the intense type of like risk taking and and adrenaline that you seek through something like as intense as wartime, it is something that makes you crazy, that it can actually in some ways be 2 sides of the same coin. It's not, because you can also be heroic, and not rape people. So like, obviously, like these 2 things don't have to go hand in hand, but to show that these 2 things really do coexist and one doesn't negate the other was important. The only critique I had with how it was set up actually was that it makes it seem that the death of his friend, is it, I forget his friend's name.
It's Brownie. Yeah.
Brownie, yes. Is a type of catalyst for his behavior, that was where he snapped. And I kind of would have preferred if there wasn't something that seemed like it corresponded so one-on-one. Like, everything is there to make you snap. Like, it's the overwhelming sense of this wartime. It's not that now, they killed that one person, or the whole house was close to us this one night, so now I did it. Like, I felt like a problem sometimes with narrative is that it necessarily tries to make sense and create a type of cause and effect. And I didn't like that. I felt like I was getting it a little bit set up for him to turn. I kind of wanted him to be heroic and suddenly not. But all in all, I thought it was really useful and a really good depiction.
Yeah, I like what you said about how you can be both things, and I think most movies would have chosen to do that with the Erickson character, where he is brave, but he's also scared, or in his own words, cowardly. For the film to do that with essentially the central villain, the rapist and the kidnapper, that's a hard pitch. And at times I'm surprised this movie was made. Like, we're gonna show the heroic side of the rapist. So it makes for a very interesting and affecting watch.
What did you guys think of Penn in the role? He kind of apparently was not pleased with the role because of his accent, which I think is, I would agree with. I'm not actually that fond of his accent. However, I love him in the role. I just, I didn't like the accent too much, and it was a little hard to hear. I'm not entirely sure what part of the country that's supposed to be from anyway. But what did you guys think of him in that role?
I thought it was really great in it. I agree with the accent. I really wish I had subtitles, because I just didn't know what the heck he was saying a lot of times. So there's that. But I thought he was extremely well cast. He just looked so young. I mean, he was so young. And this is me being able to tell I'm getting older when I see these people and think they're so young. But like, just that type of like youthful, like golden boy image that he had, combined with this type of like salt of the earth kind of portrayal, I felt that really really worked well for him. And that he was incredibly likable. And then he wasn't, but he could be incredibly likable when he wanted to be. I found really, really compelling. I thought it was a very like versatile role that he played.
Yeah, I agree. He's definitely very compelling, and I think his role is what the movie depended on. He has to be convincing. He has to be charismatic. He has to be likable, and we have to believe that because he's going to take three other men down a very dark path, and he has to be a leader of men to be able to do that, to be able to turn dark and lead these people in there. So I think if he did not give it his all like he did, the movie would have fallen flatter. And yeah, the accent was, I don't know what was going on there.
Yeah, the original person who this is based on was from northern New York, even though this accent sounds something like a Brooklyn cliche to me. But regardless, one thing that struck me with it is he's such a competent person, and I think where that opening, you see that the various things he's able to do in a very short period of time. He's able to handle the situation, and he's able to save people. He's able to be kind of considerate of that environment, and he is heroic and recommended for a Bronze Star, I think, by Erickson. The other aspect to his performance that I saw, and tell me if you guys saw this or not, was there's occasionally this like big kid that comes out, like not a 20-year-old, but like a 13-year-old. And he seems to control, it seems to be a tool that he has, but it's a really interesting tactic he uses, this kind of like big kind of muscular kid, and all of that competence and those points seem to fade away. It's also probably the points in the movie when he's almost his ugliest.
Absolutely. I think he does have a big, in fact, I was thinking that when I was watching the movie. I think he unleashes it, whether knowingly or unknowingly, when he gets pushed back upon by Michael J. Fox. When Erickson refused to be part of the gang rape, he starts insulting him, and he goes into starts calling him gay or what have you, which is, you associate that behavior with kind of like young kids, especially young boys. That it's common, those kind of insults, and then turning to his friends and doing vulgar hand gesture, that is common in very young kids, and then you grow out of that. And so to see him revert to that style, it was kind of surprising in a way, where before he was just, his charisma convinced people to do things, and when his charisma was pushed back upon, he reverted to this big kid.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also think it's a way of it was a type of tactic to undercut the seriousness of what they're doing. It seemed like it's something he did to try to say, like, to completely lower the stakes and act like things aren't as big of a deal as they are. So that this type of like juvenile behavior is very deliberate, because then it seems like Erickson is actually freaking out over basically nothing. And he's kind of goading him to say what they're actually about to do, but he's putting it in a context where you wouldn't actually say it, because they're talking like 13-year-olds. So I feel like it's very much a tactic to completely sidestep, I think, the incredible like adult behavior that is happening in the scene as well. So yeah, I definitely think it was an important part of his character for sure.
It's time for question 2.
What does Owen's mother offer her daughter as she's taken away?
Locked in.
All right, Ragnar, what do you have?
The mother was trying to offer some kind of blanket or rag. I believe it was just like a light-colored blanket.
What do you have, Margaret?
I have a scarf.
Okay. Very good. It was a scarf, so I'll give Margaret the points for that question. It is kind of it's hard to tell. You know what? Points for everybody. I think that's fine.
I think that's because you can't tell. I knew it was a scarf because it's in the New Yorker article, so I knew that that's what it was supposed to be. But there's no way that like you could tell what the heck that was from watching.
Yeah, and that as Margaret pointed out, that is taken right from the article. Apparently, that is just what they did. And I brought this question forward to talk about. In the movie, her name is Oanh, Oanh. In the original story, it was not. It was Min, I believe.
Phao Ti Mao.
Phao Ti Mao. Okay. Thank you.
Fan Ti Mao. Sorry, I have it written down here, but I'm sure I did not pronounce it correctly.
Okay.
Mao.
Mao. Phao Ti Mao. Okay. So yeah, they've changed a number of these names, in part to protect people, because actually her family ended up being brutalized after. And in part because of this incident. I'm not entirely sure that's why they changed everybody's name, but it was changed for the movie. But regardless, I brought this question forward to talk about her role in the movie and ask you guys about what you thought of the way this character was treated, her kind of prominence in the movie, and such things as that. Because she is, I would say, just to start us up, she's an interesting almost absence, right? I don't think we even get her name. Like I've seen the movie 3 times. I don't think we've heard it. I took it from the credits. That's the only way I knew. And we don't get any of her language either. We don't really ever know what she says. And so there is this, it's even hard to see her. She's so upset or being treated, and also the camera, until she's at her worst, the camera doesn't necessarily meditate on her until the scene at the bridge. And that was curious to me, that it seemed to be a movie in which this person doesn't necessarily have an identity.
I thought that was important that she doesn't have an identity, because the soldiers, the 4 soldiers, don't have an identity for her. They don't see her as a human. And so the film was shot that way, except for when Eriksen was talking to her. And when Eriksen was alone with her, then you really get to see her face, because he sees her as a human. And I thought the most impactful scene of the movie was after the rape, when Eriksen is trying to free her, and she cowers from him several times. I mean, I truly felt, that she was like a traumatized, frightened animal that was just cowering from some danger that's coming, just primal fear. And this actress, who I don't think, she doesn't have any other role that I can find, and it's pretty much the only emotion that she has to portray throughout the whole movie, just knocked it out of the park. Just was incredible in that scene. And it's only until that's a little bit after that scene that the light hits her face, and Eriksen sees her face is bloodied and beaten up, where everything just really starts to dawn on him. And then Michael J. Fox has one of his most powerful scenes, when he starts crying when he sees her. So I think she did a phenomenal job, and I think the movie was very clever in making her a non-entity, and also a very compassionate, or one that we emphasize with very strongly at the same time.
So I actually have very complicated feelings about her being kind of erased in many ways from the film. So on one hand, I have a lot of problems with her kind of erasure, because first of all, like, taking away her humanity, like, while it's very helpful for understanding the situation and the perspective of these men, and at the end of the day, it is Eriksen's story. So like, I understand that, and necessarily this trauma is dehumanizing, so I don't have any critiques of her performance. There's also the reality that Eriksen wanted to prosecute these men because she deserved a story. It was supposed to be about her. Like, the narrative is him processing this trauma, but he's saying that this is for her, and we don't get that as much in the film. But I also like I really sometimes question the ethics of seeing such like intense suffering on the screen as a form of entertainment, even though we're not like entertained, like having a good time. I do sometimes wonder like why are we seeing this? Or is this just some sort of like disguised sentimentality, that there's a sense of like we see this suffering, we feel uncomfortable with it, and somehow now we feel like we have a connection with the suffering that's happened, but we haven't. We're just watching a film. So I don't know if I entirely like the way that we just kind of see this dehumanized version of her only. I think it does take something away, and she instead kind of stands in place like a symbol of abuse that happens, as opposed to a woman who has been dehumanized. I don't know if that all makes sense, because I have like a lot of like conflicting feelings about it. I also wonder what I would do to solve that problem in this film, and I can't think of a lot of answers. I think the only thing I would do to maybe have her regain some of her humanity is to add a scene or two in which the family is involved, or a photograph of her before she is kidnapped is displayed, or something is done in the legal procedures, something to show the audience her outside of these few days. And I think that could happen afterwards. But the fact that we don't have it at all is kind of it's concerning to me. I think it's a type of erasure there for the sake of this story about these men. So I don't know. That's kind of a rambling answer to say, like, I like a lot of this depiction, but I also have some problems with it.
My reading of it ends up being that it's about that it's kind of about the impossibility of giving her focus in the way you're talking about Margaret. I mean, I don't. There is one. I don't call it a solution, but one thing Brian De Palma gives her, which is the woman on the train, is the same actress. And that actress is Thai Thu Lee. I might be mispronouncing that, but and so we do see not Own outside of that context, but we actually see that same figure, that same person, surviving and presumably thriving. She's a student. However, I think so much of the movie is about the impossibility of giving her presence or giving her identity. Because in part because we never get her name. And you could say maybe that's an oversight. It always felt kind of so deliberate to me, because the justice that ends up getting served, I mean, justice is served, but it's also very paltry. And if you know the history of this, and I know Margaret does, one of those sentences were thrown out, and everybody else's sentence was reduced to 8 years, and they all hit probation after 4. So it seems as if that something failed to happen here. Even in the end, something failed to happen here.
And I'd like to just jump in real quick and say that scene at the end with the woman was my least favorite scene. I thought it was a critical mistake for that film for so many reasons, and I thought it was frankly like upsetting and insulting to the woman, to the woman who is raped. That you have this type of like sequence where he's just absolved because another Asian woman, who I guess is the same woman, but she's not, who doesn't know him, is doing this type of like insight, like emotional labor that requires a type of feminine instinct that speaks for all of women and her land. And that's somehow going to make him feel better about it. Like this weird like absolution that can exist, but also like I felt that was actually a further erasure of the woman who was raped, because there was a sense of like, well, he's at least forgiven by this other woman on the train. So there was some piece there. I know that's not entirely what was meant, but I found it to be a really like dissatisfying and I don't know, off-putting ending.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I do want to talk about some points that you said, but the most recent one was that the ending that you were critiquing, and I would agree with you. I like the bookend idea. I like him being in the bus and seeing a girl that reminds him of the victim, and I liked that. And I even like him giving her the scarf because in a way it calls back to the scarf from the beginning that the mother gave him. So I like that. And I almost wish it would have ended with her just saying, okay, thanks, bye. And then going about her way, and him not really finding that resolution, that the you're forgiven kind of thing, which was just kind of like, why would she say this to some random guy just giving her a scarf? So it was a bit odd. So I like the idea, but I do agree that the ending was, I don't know, just a bit distasteful. And I think it would have been more powerful if he didn't find absolution. That's some stuff that he has to live with for the rest of his life, because he does. So I absolutely agree with you on that. Then as far as the why, and I think this is a very important question, because in all the movies that I've reviewed on this podcast, we never really ask, why is this being filmed? Why are we watching this? And it's a very difficult question, because this is an extremely heavy movie. And I guess for me, it goes into, well, why was there an article written about this? Why is there a painting about these things? It is, I would see, there's movies like Marvel, that's business and it's entertainment. And then there's movies like this that is more artistic. But what is the point? It's a good question. And I know you know this because you said that, but I just want to say, I agree with your kind of like, what's the word? Kind of like torn, it's an important tale. It's an important story to be told. And probably this movie spread that story more than the article did, in its own imperfect way. So it is, and that's what I like that. I like this kind of like torn emotions. It makes the movie and the experience more interesting. Not that I should be having a great time about this woman's experience, but you understand what I'm saying.
Do you guys know the original ending? How it was originally written?
Oh no, I don't.
No, the original ending is we see his dream, and it stays in his dream. And in his dream, those guys get out of jail and they come to his house, and they grab his wife and daughter, and then Thomas, the corporal, says, she's the pretty one, let's take her. And then Minerve says, well, she's the pretty one, echoing the scene in the hutch. And the scene ends with them, with the dream. The movie ends with another rape. It's a dream, but it's that. And David Ray rewrote the ending, including that kind of corny line, I think it's over now, under duress. He did not want to write that. He wanted to stay with the hard scene. And De Palma put forward two arguments why he didn't want that. The first one was he didn't want any more violence to happen. He didn't want to show any more. He thought at that point you're just torturing Erikson because,
And the audience.
Yeah, and the audience, which is actually a question I have for you. The other one, which I thought was interesting, and I actually want to know what you guys think about this, because I don't know how convincing this is he saw the unnamed woman at the end as representing basically moving on or not being defined by a traumatic historical episode. He said in an interview, he said, many Vietnamese people have come to America. They're our countrymen. They're people living in Vietnam have moved on and become successful. And that he wanted the end to show that Vietnamese people were not strictly victims, right? That there was something beyond this. It seems like the writing is so bad that kind of gets lost. I don't know if that intention was manifest.
I think that's a great idea, and I think, and I was on board with that, and I felt like I saw that a little bit, because you see her and she's I mean, the way she's dressed and the way she's sitting, she seems like a successful person. She's not begging on the street. She's very well put together, looks very nice, and looks like she's going somewhere. And I think if he were to just leave it at that, the visual there is enough to show us that, look, this person is successful in a country that did horrific things to her people. So I think that's a great idea. I do think that gets lost because of that corny ending, that corny line. Just the very end, the last 30 seconds, just didn't. The landing wasn't great.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, like, not to keep bringing it back to this article, but it is how the article ends: is that he's on the bus, he sees an Asian woman, and he was sleeping on the bus. He wakes up, and for a second, it makes him think of her, and he imagines like this peaceful scene, and he imagines that this is a woman back in Vietnam just going about her day, and there's something like really beautiful, but it's clear like this is him just making this kind of subconscious connection. And so I felt like, okay, I know exactly what they're doing here. They're recreating this scene, and I like the idea of showing, like, yes, like moving on, the sense of like Vietnamese people are not just marked by this one thing. But the only word, like, term I can use for this is like emotional labor from this woman. That the fact that it's somehow still on her shoulders to absolve him, and that there's this immediate knowing that she's able to kind of identify the situation pretty immediately. This is probably me reading too much into the film, but I read that scene as a woman who has seen a lot of Vietnam vets, and has probably said things like this a lot, like as a Vietnamese woman living during this time, that there's an immediate recognition because there's thousands of Ericksons all over the place, and she is somehow on her shoulders to comfort the Ericksons of the nation. So yeah, it was a good idea. I just did not like how it ended.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the only way the scene makes sense. And I even thought that as I was watching it, like, the only way that conversation makes sense is if she's some kind of volunteer or has experienced this many times before, so she knows what this man is going through and decides to comfort him. That's the only way it makes sense. But it's putting too much on the audience to have to like make that connection.
I don't, as a woman, I'm not a woman of color. I don't have the same societal pressures at all. But I would say, like, as a woman, like, there is a sense of kind of being expected to provide a type of emotional label, and like, I don't mind it, but there is a sense of like, oh, you're a woman, you understand, you comfort. There is actually a gender dynamic that actually comes to play very quickly. And again, this is maybe why I'm reading into it. But there's a sense of like, I don't know, recognizing a lost soul and recognizing it's kind of your job to nurture in any given moment. So I get the impression that this is a type of understanding from this woman. And again, this is not my like identity. It's not my perspective. This could be completely a projection on my end. But that was the impression I got.
So at the end of round one, we have a tie with 1 point apiece, and we're going to take a brief break, and we will be right back.
Hello, and welcome back to B-Side. Finally, it is B-Side. Today we're going to be talking about Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
We're going to be discussing the famous W.F. Murnau film from 1927, Sunrise.
The Icelandic movie from 2015, Rams. Juzo Itami's 1985 picture, Tam Popo. And today I'm going to be talking about a good old film that we just covered, and this is 1984's Ghostbusters.
Talking Pictures Trivia B-Side, wherever you listen to Talking Pictures Trivia.
All right, and we're back. Now at our midpoint, we usually ask our guest if they had a potential sequel in mind. What would you do? What would be the next chapter in this story were you to script one? And who would like to start?
So, I mean, this isn't exactly a movie that necessarily warrants a sequel. Not really a round two kind of movie, but if I were to write a film, it would be a type of companion piece, I think, and it would be probably the other women who are kind of erased from this movie. So it could either be a film about Owen's family and what happened in their participation in this trial and the type of choices that they had to make and the reasons why they cooperated with the authorities to have these men prosecuted. So that would be it. Or I would actually have a story about the wife of one of the men convicted. As well, and someone raising a child while their husband is like serving a sentence for these horrible war crimes, and how you would process that. So that's like actually two sequels, but that's, I think, the direction I would go.
You have a whole trilogy set up.
Yes, it would be a great time.
How about you, Ragnar?
I felt that at the end, regardless of that final line that we all agree is not great, Michael J. Fox still looked pretty messed up, as he should be. He was even sweating, I think. So I think there's still a lot to explore in that character. I would push the sequel. Originally, when I wrote this sequel, quote unquote, I did not know that their sentences were reduced so dramatically. So I said, 20 years in the future when they got out. So I believe they got out in less than 10 or something like that. So let's just say in 10 years, how is Michael J. Fox and his family, his wife and his daughter, handling it? Now that these soldiers are coming out of prison, are they going to seek revenge? Have they figured out that it was their doing that got them where they are, and not Michael J. Fox standing up for the victim? So there's a lot to explore, and the dynamic, because it was hinted at there was going to be some kind of revenge. So it would be a movie exploring if that does come about 10 years down the road, and you can call it Casualties of Peace.
It's time for question 3.
When Corporal Thomas E. Clark asks Sergeant Tony Meserve when was the last time he had a real woman, what is Meserve's response?
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right, Margaret, what do you have?
Oh, gosh, I remember this scene, and I swear I do not remember what he said. I thought that he said something along the lines that she was a real woman, but I could be I feel in like my bones that I'm misremembering this. So, but yeah, that he said something to the extent about her being a real woman after raping her, but I don't know, frankly.
Ragnar, what do you have?
You got it, Margaret. He does say she is real, and I think he says it a few times, mumbling to himself or something like that.
Yes, he says, she was real. I think she was real. And so this brings us to the crux of the movie and the violence and in the movie. The movie that came to mind when I watched this for my second viewing for this podcast was Gaspar Noé's Irreversible. I don't know if anybody has seen that. You have, Ragnar? Well, that movie is also about a rape, a violent rape that occurs in the middle of the movie. It does the Harold Pinter betrayal thing that moves backwards, and I didn't see the rest of the movie because I turned it off after the scene. It's quite a disgusting movie in a number of ways, and that scene that sort of finished it for me. I didn't really need to see the rest of the movie, and I think there's a number of kind of depictions of violent sex. You could think of, I think, Wes Craven's Last House on the Left is another one, which depicts rape, or Straw Dogs, all of which I really hate, and I think they are either kind of tantalizing in the way they depict it, or they have this sort of immense kind of nihilism, neither of which I think is is right, is appropriate, or really works. And I found this movie, the violence in this movie, to be both deeply upsetting, but functional. I didn't have that response. I didn't want to turn the movie off after seeing it. I didn't think it was this kind of nihilistic close to the human species or anything like that. And I was wondering what you guys thought of the violence in all its forms.
Yeah, I have seen those movies that you talked about, especially Straw Dogs really stands out to me because that rape scene, it reminded me more of like these torture porn movies, like Saw or Saw 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, where the violence is the purpose. And I don't know. And I couldn't get through Straw Dogs, didn't like it. This one, I mean, it's an impossible thing to see, to film. How do you film a rape and have it pay service to the story instead of just be gratuitous? I think it's as good as it could be. You know, they shot it, I think, from Ericsson's perspective, or at least he walked away from the hut and he was standing guard. I keep doing quotation marks in a audio podcast, so I'll just say quote unquote standing guard. So it's from his perspective, which makes sense. The whole movie is his perspective. Yeah, so I agree. As hard as it is, this is as good as you can do it, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree that it's a very, very difficult thing. And I think they did it well to make it like horrifying, but it didn't linger. I don't have the same like film context that you guys do. I watch a lot of really like nice little films. So, you know.
And then Tom makes you watch this one.
No, but my context.
They're not worth watching, by the way. Watch none of those movies.
Don't worry. No, but with that in mind, my context actually for this is the literature I study. I study a lot of abolitionist literature and a lot of anti-colonial literature. In particular, I look at how violence is depicted in poetry, in particular, but narratives that were circulated throughout the 19th century, and they almost always are focused on the violation of a woman, and it's a spectacle of typically the public rape and the murder of a woman and the response that's done by the man. And there's actually a lot of literature that even suggests that this type of trope of the brutalization of a woman as this type of cornerstone of civilization, like the call for man to civilized society, going back to like ancient Rome with the rape of Lucretia, actually being the catalyzing event for like the Roman Republic. So there's this entire like idea of women being brutalized, and there's like this paternalistic call, patriarchal call that comes with it. And I think a lot like, okay, what is the function of this? What does this actually say about how we view women and women's bodies for entertainment? And I don't have any good questions. This is a very long-winded way to say, I often think about the function of spectacle in this. Like, is this abuse becoming a spectacle? Meaning, is this something that's meant to be viewed and we are somehow like lingering in the viewing, and it's all about the imagery itself, and that's a key form of the entertainment, and even like a key form of showing your skill as an artist, how you can have this spectacle. And in many of these cases with these narratives, the spectacle, it's about watching the woman brutalized, but it's also about knowing who's watching the woman brutalized as well. And it's the way of sharing this type of witness that then the audience does. You see who's seeing. It's this weird kind of dynamic. And I think that this film does that and deals with that. And I think that it does enough to make you deeply uncomfortable, but it doesn't fall fully into spectacle range. And part of that is because it relies on sound so much. I think that that's really the key distinguisher, that it's horrifying, but because it's heard so much as opposed to visually shown as much, I think that that's how they kind of split the difference. But yeah, I don't know. I can't imagine how they would do it differently, even though it's a difficult thing to film.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point. This idea of spectacle, avoiding that, as you're saying, yeah, it's a really great point. And I think that her walking on the bridge after she's stabbed and she walks across that bridge it's a stunning bit of cinematography. I think that also helps, is that it doesn't do what these other movies does. It doesn't do what you were saying, Margaret, that kind of spectacle thing, and certainly doesn't titillate. And it's also a really great point about it's done with sound, which if Margaret read the article that's based on, I think Erikson says he compares it to the sound of gutting a deer in that article. That was, they took it out of the movie, but that was what he heard. That's what it sounded like, and yeah, that kind of sense seems to be brought forward. And then just it's a horrifying scene, but her walking across the bridge it's a stunning bit of cinematography. And Meserve's response to her too is strange. He doesn't shoot her right away. There's something sort of, initially anyway, beyond him about what's happening in that moment. I've never been able to quite make out what that moment is about when Meserve first sees her walking across the bridge, and he just yells for everybody else to shoot her. Right? I mean, he eventually does, but he doesn't seem to know what to do in that moment.
And not only, I think that seems connected to the one right before, because not only does he not shoot her first and orders everyone else to do it, he doesn't stab her. And he passes the knife around to everybody else except for himself. He never says, fine, I'll do it, even though this is all his idea and his plan, and he executed it. So I do agree with you that there's something going on there. I just can't quite figure it out, but something's happening to him. And I just want to go back to what you said about the sound of like skinning a deer or gutting a deer. And
I
kind of
thought he said gutting a deer.
Deer. And it kind of reminds me of what I said earlier, not knowing this because I hadn't read the article, about the scene after the rape when Michael J. Fox's character is trying to help her. She sounds, I mean, when I was watching, I was like, this is like a terrified animal, like a deer. Like that, and it's not violence, but it's the aftermath of violence that was portrayed just so harrowing. And even though this might be a little ridiculous to say, it almost affected me more than the violence. That scene when he's trying to help her and she's just backing away, terrified, the language barrier, everything, it rattled me more than the rape scene, which when you watch, I mean, just because anyone, who's human, you just try to kind of like go away mentally a little bit, so it was just very, very affecting. And absolutely the scene on the bridge is phenomenal. In particular, Brian De Palma, he's a very distinct filmmaker. His styles are very unique. And one of his favorite things to do is to bring a close-up of someone's face while have something happening in the background. And he hinted at that in the beginning with Michael J. Fox when Brownie was shot. He was shooting and he didn't see the people going into a tunnel behind him until a certain point. And in the bridge, and this was also very affecting, he's shooting down at the river and he doesn't see her get stabbed with a machete in the background near the train tracks. So I thought that was also incredibly done. The director and the cinematographer have worked together in various movies, and they're a phenomenal team. I mean, they're great filmmakers.
So yeah, I guess I'd like to dovetail on both of the points that you guys made. I guess first of all, with that kind of refusal to kill her, what struck me was that he really wanted the more hesitant. Why am I so bad at names? The more like hesitant Diaz. Yes,
the younger one.
Yeah, he really wanted Diaz to do it because Clark was very gung ho. But there seemed to be an insistence. First of all, I think there was this realization of how serious it is. Like, it's one thing to rape someone, but then when you are murdering them, it somehow weirdly becomes more, not weirdly, but it becomes more real. So this insistence that if Diaz, I got the impression that if Diaz did it, first of all, like, it would be less likely that they talk, but there was also a sense of he did it somehow was more justifiable. But if Clark did it could still be something horrible. There was something important about Diaz crossing the line. So that was interesting to me. But then also what you were saying about that scene with Erikson coming in and she's still so terrified. For me, like what really struck me was that his presence is a type of violence. It's not intended. He does ultimately offer her comfort. Like she does get a slight, like kind of reprieve in that moment. So it's not that he's being violent, but his everything about those circumstances, like who he is, what he embodies as a part of that group, that being close by, he can't help but actually perpetuate the violence regardless, because it's all traumatizing in this moment, and it's all going to be read as trauma. And I felt that also showed his helplessness, that even though he's desperately trying not to be complicit, his presence is a type of complicit, like he is complicit in a way, no matter what. And he perpetuates it, even though he desperately wants to do the opposite.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because, I remember even thinking when he's trying to help, I'm like, hey, buddy, slow down. Like, don't be so in her face about it. Maybe from a distance offer her food to try to calm her down. But I agree that even though he's trying to help her, just him walking towards her is, adding fuel to the fire. And what I like about what I like about the scene after is when he's trying to free her, and then he can't. He tries to get her, he tries to shoot her in a way. He goes like, shoot, go, because I can't go with you. I'm a deserter and this and that. I really appreciated that scene because I put myself in his shoes, in that, he's I think he's older than the rest, maybe a little bit. I say that because he has a wife and daughter, even though you can have that earlier, but I assume that he's a little bit older, at least maybe more mature, because he has a wife and daughter that he loves. I also have a wife and a very young daughter, and which is something that's changed my life very recently. And putting myself in his shoes, you're in the middle of the jungle, surrounded by 4 guys that, they could kill you, to hide this thing, but you're torn to help. So what do? Do you help this person in front of you? Clearly he wants to. Or is your priority to go back home to your daughter and make sure she has a father? It's a very difficult scene. I wish they explored that a little bit. I think they did in that scene, and I appreciated that. And it's, there's no easy answer. That's why it was such a memorable scene, because there is no easy answer.
It's interesting, the reason why he can't, right? Why he can't leave with her, with Own. He says, do you remember what he says? He says, it's I'll be a deserter.
I'll be a deserter. Yeah, I wish they brought it to his family rather than his status in the military, or maybe somehow those were connected. I don't know. But
I think it's part of the problem of him, or part of the moral guilt, is that the thing, and you read about it in this book too, but I think it's not just the book or the article. I think it's clear in the movie, is there's this like military system, and he can't get out of it, and not even like he can't, like he physically can't get out of it. He's psychologically kind of stuck in that place, and he is, somewhat, you could say he might be somewhat guilty in that regard. Now, granted, if he runs away with her, they're probably just going to kill him, right? I don't think he's going to get very far with a dying woman, so, or a very sick woman. So it's not, it's not a tremendous amount of guilt, I think. But
do you think he was, when he didn't go with her, do you think it was because, like, I guess I'm a little bit confused as to the deserter thing. Mm-hmm. He says, I don't want to be a deserter. And I took it as he doesn't want something to happen to him that will affect his family, because I don't think he cares too much about the system, because right after the events, he really fights against that system to the detriment of his well-being. Ultimately he gets away with it, but someone tried to assassinate him. So I was just confused. At one scene, he seemed to be, I don't want to be a deserter. And then right after, he's like, let's fight the system. I'm not sure.
he never doesn't follow an order, with the exception of rape. Right? He never, like, when they rape her, they tell him, "You're on point." Right? He doesn't. Now, he probably couldn't do anything to four-armed men with guns, right? But he goes right to point. He doesn't. He does whenever he questions Minerve, and Minerve says, "Go off, relieve John C. Reilly's character, whose name I forgot, Hutton, something like that. Hatcher, thank you. He goes and does it. There is a certain chain of command that's been beaten into him. I don't know if that makes him guilty. I tend to think not, but I do think I think that's in him even more than the wife and daughter thing.
I guess I read that as he knew that he was way alone. Like, I'm in the middle of nowhere with 4 jackals, that if I don't cozy up to, they will kill me. And I have to do something about this, maybe when I can be more effective later on. I guess that's how I read it, rather than him being like, into his mind being kind of shackled to the chain of command. But I don't know. That was just my reading.
What do you think, Margaret?
I don't know. I guess I read it a little bit more like Ragnar's reading it, that he's just like yes, he was concerned about being a deserter. He can't do that, but it's not so much that he's breaking the rules. It's just like the rules are the only thing that's keeping him alive. As a deserter, he is in nobody's army. Anybody can shoot him, and there's a lot of people with guns, so like odds are you're going to get shot pretty quickly. So I felt like it wasn't so much that, although I do think it's worth noting that he never like to Tom's point, he never does go outside of procedure. Like, he goes to his superiors, he has a little bit of insubordination, but it's not true insubordination. And then he talks to a minister who then turns us over to criminal investigations, which is also extremely by the book. So he never actually does anything. He's subversive in nature because he's not breaking the unspoken rules, but he's very good at like following the spoken rules and the actual procedures.
Right. So like subversive within the structure.
Yeah.
Within the rules of the structure.
And more so that there's a sense that he believes that the structure ultimately will serve justice. And that's something that's throughout the film, that he says things like, gosh, we're supposed to be helping these people. He says this over again. He still has this type of idealization. And that's why I think that scene with Wiley is so important, where he tells him about his daughter's birth and being in jail and basically being trained into submission to the system because this is how you see your daughter. And I think it's an important moment because he's explaining to somebody who has lived a life where the system is supposed to be about justice, that the system actually does mean if you do the right thing and you work hard, like, you will have justice. And he's so like realizing that's not necessarily the case.
Do you know when the writing of the article or the writing of the book or the making of the movie, had these people's sentences already been reduced, or were people thinking this guy's going to, or at least one guy is going to be there for life? I'm just curious as to like when it was known, like, oh, they're getting off with a slap in the wrists.
It's in the book. It's not in the movie, obviously, but yeah.
It's in the article too. And the article came out in 1969. So it was, I think it was within 18 months to 2 years or something that things had been reduced.
Because I'll just find it, going back to my sequel, Casualties of Peace, like I would find it interesting seeing the reaction to like, okay, I pushed hard, I went against the system, I was almost killed, and I got them behind bars. You know, there's some form of justice, and then it be drastically reduced, and how he would react to that. Just a side rant.
Yeah, that is. It's interesting that that's left out of the movie, right? The reduction in sentences. I think that's probably part of De Palma's wanting to ease the tension or ease the pain at the end. And I think that kind of sympathy, even though I think we all have our own troubles with the ending, that sort of sympathy bleeds through a lot of these scenes. There's a lot of sympathy in this movie, and I think it may be that you get a crappy ending in order to have a more humane picture. But yeah, I think that would have been rough also with this movie to kind of see those sentences reduced, even though
Right.
probably very important to
Right.
to have put that in there. Yeah,
I would have rather have that than the second rape scene, even though that was imaginary. I mean, man, you can't air that movie, you know. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, well, I would have liked a little bit more time spent lingering on the fact that Mazov wasn't convicted of rape in this case.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and they say like, oh, he's convicted of murder, but he doesn't get a rape charge after all of that.
Funny.
Yeah, and like that's a pretty big deal.
What's up with that?
Yeah, and that's
does
what
anyone know why?
happened. I don't, because that sentencing was a crapshoot. But yeah, it was the unpremeditated murder, I think. Or was it premeditated murder? I don't remember what, but he
I
got
think
off.
one of them got, like Thomas or
Thomas did, yeah.
Yeah.
Thomas got premeditated.
Yeah, and rape. Yeah.
And rape.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But Mazov actually got less of conviction.
That is interesting. Yeah, and tying it to the movie, like I feel like after the bridge scene, the weight and the pacing kind of, and the movie making kind of deflated a little bit. It just kind of like fast forward through a lot of things. And I understand runtime is only so long, but they did kind of speed through that. I mean, this whole second half could have been its own movie, you know, almost like a legal thriller. So very deep and multi-layered story for sure.
It's time for question 4.
What year does the movie open up on? Not what year is in the print right at the beginning of the film, but what year does the movie actually start on visually?
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right, Ragnar, what do you have?
1970.
All right, Margaret, what do you have?
1968.
Oh, okay, almost. We're going to go to a tiebreaker. It was 1974, and we know that because Richard Nixon had just resigned. You could see it in the newspapers.
I mean,
Yes.
Ragnar was closer, so if you wanted to do a tiebreaker, you could.
Price is Right.
Yeah,
Oh.
I mean.
Well, I have another one. If
Okay.
if this doesn't work out, then we will. We Ragnar may get it. I actually have a few tiebreakers, but anyway, let's give this a try. What historical figure does Hatcher compare himself to?
Locked in.
A moment here. Locked in.
All right, Ragnar, what do you have?
My wild guess is going to be Alexander the Great.
Okay, Margaret, what do you have?
Genghis Khan.
All right, and Margaret wins the episode.
Nice.
Congratulations. Very good. So I actually didn't bring that question forward to talk about Genghis Khan. I just had it as a tiebreaker. But I did want to talk about Michael J. Fox and his performance. We started this episode talking about Sean Penn and the work he does. Michael J. Fox is apparently a very different type of process for his acting than Penn. Apparently, Sean Penn did not speak to anyone in the cast during the filming in order to create a kind of discomfort and refused to kind of acknowledge Michael J. Fox's contributions in any way. And then, of course, Michael J. Fox is much more kind of open and charismatic in his own way. And I want to know what you thought of Fox in the film, as well as the character he is embodying, that is Erickson.
When I started watching the film, I kind of felt he was a bit miscast at first, because I'm used to Marty McFly, right? And I didn't know if he would be able to carry the weight of that role. But by the end, I was pleasantly surprised by his performance. I don't think he was the best actor on set. I do think Penn and the lady who played the victim, I forgot her name. She's only done that one movie. I think they both outclass him. But I kind of like that he did this. I appreciate that he took on this role when he was, Teen Wolf, Back to the Future. This movie came out the same year as Back to the Future 2. So I appreciated him expanding his range, and he did an admirable job, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I did like that he came in as this type of like teen icon, like that there was really a sense of like, him as this, I don't know, like naive, like teenager who kind of gets into scrapes. And I mean, that is who is drafted into the Vietnam War. What Marty
Teens.
McFly's. Yeah, teens.
True.
So there was a sense of like, I liked that initially it felt like Michael J. Fox didn't fit there, because Michael J. Fox didn't fit there. Nobody did, or very few people did. So I actually liked that it felt kind of miscast, because that's what the draft was. It was an incredible miscasting with the much like higher stakes. So yeah, I liked his performance and his casting. I would agree it wasn't on quite the same caliber as some of his castmates, but it was certainly serviceable for the role. And it was a difficult role.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, I didn't see it that way. That who is right for that role, who is right to have their way, their innocence crushed. So I think that's a very good point. You put in the heartthrob, the teenager, the all-American boy, and crush him in the hellhole that was the Vietnam War.
I like his performance a lot, because it never becomes a sort of whine. Even when he has to deal, there's the one speech I really didn't like where he has to say, and it's a real David Rabe line, like, maybe if we could die at any moment, then things matter even more,
Absolutely. Low point of the film, for sure.
Yeah, another low point. Yeah. But even that, he doesn't come off whiny or moralizing. It seems like the actual Erickson, whose name wasn't Erickson, from the article, I don't know, Margaret, if you got this impression, was much more cerebral. I got that impression that he was, a bit of a working class guy, but a bright guy. And I think he went back to college, didn't he, after the affair, or at least maybe for a little while? I
think he did. He at least started taking college classes or something. Yeah, he seemed like a very reflexive guy, and he did say that exact like speech in the article, but it came off very much as this kind of curated reflection, like thinking over several years, like this is actually how I feel about it, as opposed to this moment. And I think, was it the review that you mentioned, Tom?
The Pauline Kael review.
Yeah, I read that, and she made that exact point, that like this was in the article, but it wasn't said like this. This is actually like the worst point in this movie, and it was inappropriate to have it in this context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think she makes that point too, about him kind of having a kind of moralistic, or not a moralist. He doesn't have that kind of whatever, like Tom Cruise in Born on the 4th of July or something like that, right? That it's much more kind of reactive. It's also much more kind of animal in a cage in a lot of those things. I also wanted to ask, so we might just cut this into movie rant. It's fine. We don't actually have to stop at all. But I did want to ask about um, how kind of justice is served in this. One thing, comparing the initial story, the article, the book to this movie is in the book, he actually looks for the right person. Not only does he go up the chain of command, once that fails, he looks around and finds the right person who I believe just happens to be a reverend. Right. And he's very careful. He checks the guy out. He wants to make sure this isn't a guy who's gonna either laugh it off or get him in trouble. And
We're talking about the movie or the book?
the book, yeah.
Book,
Okay.
yeah. And the
But
Reverend happened to be a former cop too, which is
Oh,
really the
wow.
thing he didn't, the thing that he didn't know
Mhm.
actually from the impression. So that was it seemed to be the real important piece.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this, though, it's accidental. Right. It's he's drinking at a bar and the perfect guy walks up and sits down. Right. It's entirely accidental. Uh, and it's just before that scene where he knocks Clark out and he's like, "You don't have to kill me. I told everyone. No one cares." I that's yeah, another fantastic scene.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it seems like there is, even though we don't get the reduction in sentences, which I think would have been helpful, there is still, I think, this sense of this stuff still happened kind of accidentally. Like he was able to get justice sort of accidentally. He was still sort of haphazard. Um, and that's something we haven't really brought up, that kind of that ending slide into the trial. I was wondering what you guys thought of that as well.
Yeah, I felt that the way in which kind of the series of events that took place in the trial, I didn't like. I felt that they kind of revved up the stakes when the stakes are already very high. So, for example, the blowing up of the latrine, I just felt like this is kind of over the top. I mean, it's not kind of, it's extremely over the top to blow up anything. But to have suddenly it was almost like a thriller feeling or an adventure film that he is now a hero. And I got the impression that they did this because you needed him to seem truly heroic. There was a sense of like giving him back his masculinity or something by having it in this way. And then having it just kind of like slide into this kind of situation, I felt like also played along this type of like, I don't know, like action film or something like it, that it wasn't, it made it all the more dramatic. And I felt like it didn't need to be dramatic. That the fact that it was this type of like insistent reporting, which is perhaps not as interesting, I think would have been a lot more important. I felt that it was like an unnecessary like move to drama that they did it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of like mentioned it briefly before, where after the bridge scene, it just, the pacing's not quite right and the events are not quite right. And I understand you can't make this much more than 2 hours. It was under 2 hours, I think. Yeah. So I understand that, but you have a grenade blow up the latrine and he's diving out of it. Look, I love a great explosion, especially someone's diving out of the window to avoid it. So I'm all down for that. But it just felt way out of place, because then why isn't there an investigation about that? Why isn't there an investigation about him shoveling someone in the face? It was odd. And I felt they could have created tension a different way just by having them threaten his family. These people could say, "Hey, you saw what we did out in the field. We're going to do that to your wife." That's, stakes are high there, So, yeah, I don't know why that grenade scene is in there. I think it's not right. As far as the trial goes, I did love, and I think this is the best scene of the second half of the film, is when they're walking past him after it's written and he's looking at them, kind of looking away, looking at them. And I think that was a very powerful scene, much more than the grenade going off, for sure.
Yeah, well, it culminates. I think this, I really liked, as I said before, him just telling them, "Listen, no one cares. You can stop now. This doesn't matter." Though I guess I agree, it's a little over the top, the exploding thing. You could do that in a much more subtle way, but it that whole the end of the movie does feel a lot like the air is being let out of something, and it feels intentional to me. It just feels as if the that what you're seeing here is really a failure that accidentally turned into something like justice, which, as we know, turned out really not to be justice. That's outside the context of the movie, though. But that's what that whole ending felt like. That's what that's the explosion felt to me like this big dramatic thing that didn't go anywhere, just as this kind of investigation wasn't going to go anywhere, just as there isn't any kind of stability here. It doesn't really work. And, unless you accidentally get drunk next to an investigating Methodist for happenstance. And that's why that feeling of sort of hopelessness transformed. It went from this dread of what's going to happen and what you can't do to prevent it to the what we usually complain of as a kind of a Kafkaesque problem. It's not really Kafkaesque because it isn't like he doesn't know how to do the paperwork or something like that. It's worse. It's an absurdity of indifference, right? It's absurd to be this indifferent, and it's absurd that exploding a latrine just kind of doesn't matter, and that just builds on worst and past absurdities as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the absurdity of indifference by his superiors was, I think, very believable. And I mean, you can not that this is to justify or make excuses for that. Obviously, they should have been more into it. When you are dealing with so much death and just brutality day in, day out, your soldiers are getting killed, the civilians are getting killed, the enemy soldiers are getting killed. This one guy is complaining about a rape and one kill. It's like, they're dead to that. They don't care. And especially it's the enemy. Like, what are you talking about? You think I'm going to put one of my guys, on our side, on the sword because they were a little rough, quote unquote, with the enemy? And I think that's a very powerful message, just how indifferent you can become in that environment. And it took a priest or a chaplain or whatever he was, that he's there, but he's not in the field, or at least I don't know. He seemed like he was pretty well balanced. So I just imagine someone that's well balanced is probably not killing people every day. To someone from the outside to step in and say, no, this is wrong. This is what we have to do. Yeah, it's tragic.
Yeah. Well, and to go off of your point, I think it's worth noting that indifference is a really important coping mechanism. That in order to be able to live in that environment, you actually kind of like need to shut your brain off, and become insensitive to these things, because it will destroy you. And obviously turning your brain off to this destroys you in another way. So it's a lose-lose situation. But those like an essential part of survival. And with Minister, he's seeing the horrors of war, but he's not complicit in the same way. That there's a sense of being able to face what's going on and face consequences, that does not harm him the same way, because as soon as you start putting these acts on trial, you have to open the door of more culpability more broadly of what's happening. And you can't sit with those emotions or sit with those consequences when you're in the middle of all of the things that they were in the middle of. Not to justify it, but like, there is something to be said about how people survive in those situations.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. You do have to, and then are they to blame? They kind of touch upon this, where I forgot which one of the rapists say, we're soldiers, we're better served being on the field killing rather than being in this trial. I mean, we're taking kids, they're in their late teens, early 20s, they're still kids. and putting them in unimaginable stress and unimaginable horror. And then we the higher powers, are the morally right people get upset when they go too far. They don't know what, I mean, they know it was wrong. Of course they knew it was wrong, but they've been broken. And so how much is them to blame? It's just so difficult. It's so difficult to really pinpoint. It's not like somebody here stateside during peacetime goes and does a horrific thing. It's kids who have been destroyed by war doing these things. Yeah, it's a very tragic and engaging story.
It's time for Movie Rant.
The basic training of Pavla Hummel, one of Rabe's plays from 1971, the first play in a collection called the Vietnam Trilogy, which is actually where young Al Pacino got one of his starts, is about the making of a psychopath. But basically, that's what, it's the making of this. He's not really a Meserve because Pavla Hummel's not quite as competent, but that's what a lot of Rabe's plays are about. And Rabe himself was a Vietnam vet, and you could see that even in the scenes in this play that are maybe a little more theatrical or stagey. A lot of the dialogue is, I think, but that's what the theme of his kind of body of work, at least his Vietnam work, has been. It's been how this makes psychopaths, this system.
Specifically the Vietnam system, or the war in general, or what?
He's specifically talking about Vietnam. I would say like war in general. I suppose war isn't a system. War is an experience with systems attached to it. So that's what he's talking about as making psychopaths. And other things like Full Metal Jacket, I think, has tried to do this a little bit. I honestly, I do not like this movie. I think I'm alone on that.
You are alone.
Yeah, it's once they leave basic training, the movie's unmemorable. I've seen it more than once. I cannot remember what happens because there's just no life left in the movie after the suicide. But I think this movie, and if you're interested in like the basic training of Pablo Homo or of any other Rabe's plays, like Streamers is another one that touches on this. That's a consistent thing throughout his work, and you could see why he was drawn to this material.
Yeah, and it's kind of topical. We've known about the atrocities in World War I, and then about the government-sponsored atrocities in World War II, and now Vietnam, and all this. And I'm sure in time there will be things going on about Russian soldiers and what's happening in Ukraine now. It's just horrific what happens to the young mind when they're put into these situations by these old men running the government.
I'd like to once again congratulate our winner of the week, which is Margaret. Congratulations, Margaret.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome. You can find more of our content wherever you listen to podcasts, on our YouTube channel, Twitter at Talking Studios, and our website, talkingpicturestrivia.com. We are extremely grateful to all of those who subscribe, like, follow, and leave a review. Let us know your response to this episode on Twitter, talkingpicturestrivia@gmail.com, or give us a call at 201-467-8679. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be involved.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, even though it wasn't a fun movie. But thanks for the invite.
You can find me on Twitter at ThomasLehman15, and also check out our sister podcast, Talking Pictures Trivia B-Side. Join us next time as we continue to prep for Top Gun 2 when we discuss Nick's recommendation from 2009, Inglourious Bastards. Stay tuned for our first impression of this film.
Ding, 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 ding. Next week, we'll be discussing Inglourious Bastards. Tom, how was your watch?
I saw this movie, I think, in the theaters, and the ending had been spoiled for me. which is fine. It's fine to have this movie spoiled. I watched it again this time on my television with a friend who had also watched it, and she had watched it in a graduate class in conversation with Milton Samson Agonistes, which sounds bonkers if you know that poem. But I really enjoyed this. I'm not a Tarantino fan. I don't like most of his movies, especially Pulp Fiction. I'll say that. But I like this, and I like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think these are the two Tarantino films I like. And watching this again, the campy, scene chewy stuff is a tremendous amount of fun, and it really made me miss acting. The way they used accents in it, especially Brad Pitt's character, that I love that accent and the way he articulates things. It's very, very theatrical and very enjoyable. And it also has a sort of total film feel, right? It's about movies that save us from real history. And so I had a good time. I had a lovely time. How about you, Ragnar? How was your first watch?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I mean, that Buongiorno that Brad Pitt throws out is just, every time I watch it's hilarious. It's my third time watching it. I feel that just like all his other movies, Tarantino films get better with rewatches, because you kind of get to enjoy his attention to detail and his craftsmanship more. And the tense scenes, like the opening scene, which I think is legendary, and the basement scene, the tension is still there. I still feel the tension, even though I know exactly what's going to happen. So I think it's an incredible film. And I'm very curious as to what you think, KJ.
I enjoy Tarantino movies. I do. I really like the Tarantino movies, but the first time I watched this one, I must have slept through some, because when I watched this time, there were entire chapters I had forgotten. This movie did not capture me at all. Well, I shouldn't say that. The first scene's great. The basement scene's it's fun. And Christoph Waltz is such a joy to watch in this movie the whole time. When he's on the frame, I'm in. But otherwise, I don't think this Tarantino movie's for me. But Tom, if we're pairing him with poems, I don't know very many poems. I certainly hadn't heard of the poem you had mentioned. The only one that came to my mind is "If" by Rudyard Kipling. So if anybody wants to watch the movie and then read a poem, maybe "If" by Rudyard Kipling. Maybe you can find it online.
Well, the Samson Agonistes is about Samson, right? So what does Samson do at the end of that Bible tale?
Just tell us.
Oh, so he brings the building down?
He pulls the building down, yeah. And in that poem, they change it to a theater. He's in a theater, and
I had no
kills
idea
everyone.
there was a Samson in the Bible. How about you, Nick?
yeah.
How was
Samsonite. I was way off.
How about you, Nick? How was your watch?
One of the reasons I do this podcast is to pick movies like this. I know I had seen it in the theater and enjoyed it. Probably saw it one more time after when it was on DVD, and had not seen it in many, many years. So we were doing a war theme, and it just came to mind that, you know what, I kind of want to give that a rewatch. So that's what I did. And I was pleasantly, I don't know, can you be re-surprised about a movie? I really enjoyed it. I forgot how much I enjoyed it in the past. I like the chaos in this film, the choppiness of how it feels to accomplish what they're trying to do, and the missteps along the way, because war is chaos. So I really did enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to exploring this further with you guys next week.